Welcome back. In this video we'll be considering block scope in Python, and this video is actually not that important, but for the sake of those who have been working with other programming languages. In other programming languages like Java, like JavaScript, like C++, there is the concept of block scope which does not exist in Python. This can actually create some form of confusion for others who are very conversant with other programming languages. So in Python, the concept of block scope does not exist. This is to ensure simplicity, which is kind of unique with Python programming language. So for example, in other programming languages, if you defined a variable in possibly in if and else statement or in a loop, those variables that you defined in those conditional statements or in your loop, they are kind of localized to the scope of that loop. We call that block scope in other programming languages. But in Python, any variable that you defined possibly in an if block, those variables can still be accessed globally or within the scope of their parent function. To illustrate that, let's have an example. Let's say we have an if statement. Let's say we have if, so we say if number is greater than 8. Okay, this is just a random condition, so we need to define number. So let's say number is equal to 20. Okay, so we say if number is greater than 8, then we can define a variable here. Let's say num1 is equal to 5. This is just a dumb example just to illustrate the concept of block scope that is not existent in Python. So we can say num1 is equal to 5, and outside of the if block, we are outside of the if block now. We are not inside of it. Inside of it will be in this level, but outside of it will be in this level. So outside of the if block, we can print num1. Even though num1 is not created globally, num1 is created inside of this if block. In other programming languages, this variable will be scoped to the if block, but in Python, block scope does not exist. So this num1 can still be accessed globally, but it is also prone to error. You see what I'm talking about? So if you run this now, you are going to see that num1 is equal to 5. But what if this condition is false? Let's say since number is equal to 20, so what if number is 6, which is not greater than 8? If you run this, what is going to be the value of num1? You see now that num1 is not defined. This is because this condition is false, and since this condition is false, this line of code was not executed, which makes num1 to be undefined. But that does not mean that if this condition is true, this num1 will still not be accessible outside of the scope. So to avoid situations like this, you can come to the top of your if block and you can say num1 is equal to 0, just to avoid situations in case this condition is eventually not true. So if you run this now, the condition is false now, so your num1 is going to be 0. This is like an escape route in case the condition is not true. So if the condition is true, this variable will be initialized and it will be assigned to this value. But if not true, then this is going to be the value of your variable. Summarily, in Python, the concept of block scope does not exist. Any variable that is defined inside of an if condition or a while loop or a for loop, those variables can still be accessed on the global scope or any scope that is surrounding possibly you have this if statement inside of a function. The function is the surrounding scope, so inside of that function, the variable can still be accessed, provided the condition is true, which will make this line of code to be executed. But if the condition is not true, this line of code will not be executed and you are going to run into a name error. To prevent that, you can create an escape plan at the top level. Before we round up this video, there's one more thing I want to bring to your notice. Variables can only be accessed after they've been defined. You cannot access a variable that has not been defined. Just as we have here, let's comment this out. Can comment this line of code out. So let's comment this out. Now we have number 6 to be initialized at this level, and after initializing the variable, you can as well access the variable. Let's say number, so you can access number now. But even though number is defined here, you cannot access the variable before it is defined. So if you bring this now to the top of number, you are going to run into name error because number has not been defined at this level. So you can only access a variable or a function. Scope is not only applicable to variables, it is also applicable to functions. So you can only access a variable or a function that has already been defined or initialized. You cannot access a variable before it is initialized, just as we have a number is actually defined but not before it is accessed there. So you are going to run into error. If you run this code now, you are going to run into error. But as soon as you bring this down, then you are safe. Okay, so that's that about scope. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next lesson.